let's get started.
That's great. Hi, thank you everyone for joining us. And I hope everyone is doing well. And please feel free send in your questions, submit your questions in the chat window while we're doing the presentation. We will address them at the end of the webinar. And I can see people joining from all over the places. Some people even from Europe. So I'm glad you don't have to fly into Canada because we are snowing here. So should we get started?
Let's get started, Irene.
Okay, Pawel, should we introduce ourselves first? Do you want to start first?
Sure. So my name is Pawel Rozek. I'm a vetted Jira Administrator. I currently work for McKesson, Canada. And I'm a part-time Jira Administrator, and I also am in the DevOps role.
That's great. Hi, everyone. I'm Irene, and I'm working for DragonAgile, and I actually begin the DragonAgile office. Globally, we are an Atlassian Platinum Solution Partner. So myself is an Atlassian Certified Master. So just a little bit about DragonAgile. So our main office is located in Waterloo, and we offer licensing with added value implementation, customization, training, and support for Atlassian products. So, here is today's agenda. First, Pawel will tell his migration story, and I will interview him with few questions. After that, I will tell my migration story while Pawel will do interview for me. Next, we will take questions from audience, and hopefully we can answer them. And at the end, we will wrap up the webinar. So shall we take off now?
Let's get going.
Okay. So Pawel, tell us about your recent cloud migration experience.
Sure, Irene. So first, I just wanted to say thanks for having me. Recently, I've done some Jira Cloud migrations. My management team came to me and asked if I could help with the Jira Cloud migrations. Basically, we had 3 different Jira Cloud instances. One of them was being decommissioned, and all the other projects that were not required to move to our new Jira target instance were being migrated to a different one by another team. So they asked me to move a couple of projects from that instance into our new target cloud instance, and then my manager came a couple of days later and asked if we could do a few more projects from a different Jira Cloud instance and migrate them into the target story as I'm doing everything all at once. So that's basically my request that I had, and I moved forward with it.
Sounds great. So with this requirement, how and where did you start with your journey?
Sure. So before the migration, you have a few things that you need to consider. First of all, you need to know if your cloud Jira instance has any next-gen projects. That's really important because when you have next-gen projects, what's happening is you need to actually migrate them to the old-style projects. The next-gen projects currently are not migratable to a Jira server. And because of the way we perform the migration, we had to either delete the ones that we didn't need or migrate them to regular projects. I also had to figure out if I had any plugin data that are required to be migrated. That's also really important to know ahead of time, because if you do have any plugin data, you need to consider some steps and look at the documentation from the vendor to see if they actually can migrate. You need to check the differences between priorities and instances. So for example, one of our instances had priorities P1, P2, P3, and the other one had priorities high, highest, normal, low, lowest, and TBD. So needed to merge those, get an agreement among all these teams from all the instances to make sure that they're okay with us changing the priorities. Also, a very important thing was fields. Sometimes one team calls, for example, a Scrum team field as a text field, and the other one is a drop down. So we had to creatively adjust those and consider changing those. Duplicate resolutions was another thing that was also considered, because in one instance we had canceled with 2 L's, and one instance we had canceled with 1 L. So we had to consider changing to one way or the other. And then the last thing to consider specifically for me was, do I know how to set up a Jira Server instance to perform these merges? This is important. If you don't know how to do that, then you have to look at other options.
Well, sounds a lot to consider for your migration. So with all this like pre-screening, analyzing, what were the migration options that you considered?
Sure. So the migration options that I consider was performing it using Jira Server, which is, as you can probably tell, that's the way we've chose to perform it. There's also, we considered looking at CSV exports and imports. This basically, you export all your data using a CSV, and you import it back into the target instance. And the last thing we considered was Jira Cloud Migration Assistant Early Access Program, which I have a link there. So basically, this is Atlassian doing it for you, but we've decided to go to perform it ourselves and using Jira Server method that you can see there on the screen. Basically, we downloaded the backups from Jira Cloud, created the restores into Server, and then uploaded everything back into the target instance of Jira Cloud.
So I think the first, like you said, the first option to merge the instance on server side first before you migrate to cloud looks like a good approach for your scenario, right?
Yeah.
But then how did you prepare before merging the instances?
Sure. So we've done some prep work that was required. We deleted a bunch of unused workflow schemes, unused workflows, issue type screen schemes. We deleted unused screens, issue type schemes, and issue types, except for the built-in ones that come with Jira. And then I also, this is probably one of my learnings as well, I also made a mistake, and initially during my testing, I deleted a Jira Service Desk issue type, and then I was looking at restoring that. So also removed some unused security schemes, notifications, permissions, field configurations and schemes, and additionally fields too. Oftentimes what happens is fields are just no longer used and no longer required. So we just cleaned those up. One of the things was also field context. We renamed those based on the instance that they're coming from as a preparation, so that it's easier to understand where it's coming from, which projects are using it, and we also cleaned up some groups.
Wow, that looks like a lot of a clean up manual work for you. You must be very busy at that time, right?
Yes, it was quite a lot of cleanup.
Wow. So when the time to come to a merge, right? Did you need to lock down instance, and how did you do it? And did that affect your team's work?
Sure. So we did establish a blackout period where no requests were being processed by Jira administrators. And we basically advised the user base that we need about 2 weeks, 1 to 2 weeks of prep work for all those things that I mentioned earlier to happen. So all the field cleanup and all the other stuff. So we established that the users were still able to add queue up their requests. It's just it wasn't done until after the migration was done. The other thing we've done was we removed the administrative privileges from users that should not have them. Actually, pretty much everybody except for myself and one more user, just in case he required additional work. We established a list of fields, screens, workflows, and necessary information for the migration. And we provided that to the users to say, this is what you're going to have to live with for the next 2 weeks until the production migration happens.
Well, again, sounds like a lot to prepare, and I think this is really thoughtful. And with all this a clean up preparation, so did you need to test out first on your trial instance before your final a production migration?
Great question, Irene. So yes, we had to set up a cloud instance of Jira to test it out so that we don't disrupt production stuff. But basically, after all the merging happened in the Jira server, we uploaded to this test cloud. Atlassian allows you to set up a cloud instance. It gives you 7 days, but you can also request an extended trial from Atlassian that I think is up to 30 days, from my understanding. And that allows you to do all your testing. So I've also documented a procedure for reference, for production day reference, because when you're performing production, you've done it so many times, you're prone to make mistakes and you're prone to forget something that is important, and you may possibly forget that and during production, and then you have to do it all over. But following a script is great because you're just doing it as if you were doing the testing, and everything should, and usually does, everything should be perfect.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that a good documentation definitely helps, right? We all know that even we have a try out, test out successfully once, things can still go wrong, right? But following a good documentation with already tested out the steps definitely will smooth out the migration. I think this is a really good point. So, okay, with all this, can you describe your a migration procedure?
Sure. So I touched a little bit on it a couple slides back, but basically the procedure is documented in the Atlassian website. Documentation link is right there in the slides for anyone that's interested. So basically what you do is you create a cloud backup. And once you have the Jira Cloud Backup created, you restore it onto your server. So you create it from your source instances first. Instances first. You create the backup on the Jira server, and you keep that backup in behind so that you have it for when you're actually performing the merge of the project. So once that was established for all the source instances, you create the same thing for the target instance. Then you perform project migrations using project importer utility from Atlassian. And then what I did in between was backups after every single project, so that I don't have to go back all the way to the beginning if something goes wrong. So backups in between, and then once everything is finalized, what you do is create a backup using the Jira server, which you have a link for there as well, to Atlassian documentations, and then you import that backup into the Jira Cloud.
That sounds good. So what did you learn from this migration? And do you have any particular issues that you run into?
Sure. So I've had quite a few lessons learned. One of them was when restoring a backup from Jira Cloud to Jira Server, you must have the same plugins installed on Jira Server as you have on all of your Jira Cloud instances. It's not well documented in Atlassian's documentation, but through some communication with Atlassian, I've learned that. And Atlassian allows you for a trial version of all the plugins for 30 days. And if you really need more than 30 days to perform the migration, you can ask for another trial license for plugins. So I actually recommend that you use that. So the other thing was performing check integrity, which is built into the Jira server. Jira server basically checks the integrity of the database and verifies that you have no issues. Another thing is Botran software also offers an integrity checker, which is a free tool currently, and it helps you eliminate all the problems that you have in your instance. For example, if you have duplicate issue types, that will pick it up and it will tell you got to fix that. So another lesson that I've learned was check your user base. So we had an incident where one of our users was an owner of one of the instances and was a regular user on the other. So they had an administrative account on one instance, and on the other instance, just their full name. And basically, after performing all the merges, we didn't realize this, and good thing we were doing all the testing. After performing all the merges and uploading it to our test instance of Jira Cloud, we discovered that nobody had access to the instance except for myself, because I was the one that owned it. And after reaching out to Atlassian through support tickets, they were able to quickly discover that it was that user. What happened was the external ID of that user was the same on both usernames, but they had different usernames, so it was causing issues. So Atlassian provided some really good steps to and support to avoid that, which I've also documented in my procedure, right? The other thing that I've mentioned a little bit earlier, but you have to take a backup every single time you do something. So once you perform your migration of the project, take a backup because on your Jira server, take a backup, because going back to the very beginning is much harder than just performing one change at a time. Verifying that the attachments were properly migrated during the import. I've had an instance where one of the projects, the attachments want to migrate, so I had to migrate them manually, which was basically a copy from a folder to folder, but still I had to perform that action myself rather than rely on the tool to do it for me. Last thing, but this is probably one of the most important things, was the database. So I had my test database sitting there, and I started restoring my backups and just overwriting what was in there. However, oftentimes what happens is there's some leftover data in there that basically needs to be cleaned up. So I recommend that you drop your database instead of overwriting it or just recreate a new database before you start your restore from a backup, as the data will not be overwritten and left over behind.
So do you have more tips, tricks you want to share? Yeah.
I have a few more tips and tricks on the next slide, which you can see now. Basically, have the users perform a check of your test instance is really important, because as an administrator, you do things a certain way, but your users do things very strange ways sometimes, and they have certain ways of working all the time.
Yes.
All the time. And they have strange ways of doing things that you can't think of. And you're only one person, and you have hundreds of users sometimes, or thousands of users, depending on your instance. So have them check it and tell you if there's any issues with your instance. Before performing merges, delete any projects that are associate workflows, so that your instance backup is a lot smaller. And the smaller the backup, the faster you can perform the merges. And the last thing is that when you have smaller backups, there's less chance of you making mistakes with projects that don't necessarily have to migrate. Minimize the amount of users and groups in the instance, and verify that those users should have access to the instance. There's oftentimes, especially if you're not connected to your work network, like an LDAP server, there's often users that just leave the company, and that cleanup should happen. And this is this is a great opportunity to perform that, as well as arrange the groups so that they're similar across all the instances, so that users can adjust. And then if merging back into the same instance, that's one of your source targets. Just make sure that you download all of your plugin data before you restore in production, as that is one of the things that you cannot get back anymore. So.
Well, I think those are all very practical, good tips. Thank you for sharing. And especially, I like you also taking care, like taking the steps to handle the update. Since we know right now it's also one pain point to migrate the data and keep the update.
Sure is, yeah.
Thank you.
So Irene, what's your story? Tell me about your clients' requirements.
Okay, so yeah, so I also have a migration story that I want to share with audience. So while I have a customer, right, and they have a server instance as well as a cloud instance, and both instances, they are very actively used by the internal team, also the external client. And lately, they had a lot of issues with their server, like a server instance, because that server instance is hosted on-prem on AWS, which has been like hacked multiple times. And sometimes it just caused the whole system down and developers losing working hours. And also they do not have like resources to take care of this server instance.
Yeah, so this would be a perfect example for somebody who would want to migrate to Jira Cloud, because it's all maintained by basically Atlassian, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's why they come to us. So so secondly, also for the cost reasons, since they now have a cloud instance, and the most like a new project will be like will be created with this cloud instance. So consolidate like both instance into one, it makes much more sense, right? Just for the cost reason. And so with this goal in mind, so our first thought would be like doing a full migration for the customer, which means we ideally we would like to like put all the project from the server instance and the cloud instance all together into the existing cloud instance. So so that means in order to use this approach, right? So that means we have to first export cloud instance, just like you described how you do the merge, right? So the merge can only be done on the server side. So we have to export cloud instance to a server and then merge with their server instance. After the merge complete, then we can export again into the destination cloud. So that is our first thought.
Okay, so what was important for your client when migrating all of their data?
Okay, so yeah, that's a good question. So so for my client, right? So probably for like lots of client, like customers, sometimes it's always a very critical factor they have to think about. And also for this particular like customer, app data, it's also, I think it's also applied for many customer. App data, it's also very important. For this client, they rely on the billing for like a work log to bill their client. So they cannot afford like losing the, like for example, temporal timesheet, the data, that's the app they are using. So they cannot afford to lose the log work with temporal timesheet, right? And because that's how they bill their customer. So that's very critical for them. Yeah.
So what were the pros and cons of the options that you considered then?
Yeah, so like I said, right? So our first approach will be like doing a full migration and a consolidation. But when we analyzed further, we realized that exporting cloud to server first, we would lose the important like app data, like a time log. And then even we could like merge with the server instance together and export back into a cloud instance, then we also lose the data, like update on the server side. So we lose both sides. So that doesn't sound like a customer is not very happy with this approach. So we discussed further with the customer, and then realized that that existing cloud instance is much more important for them. And the server instance, there are only limited number of projects that they actually need to export and consolidate into, move to a cloud instance. So the rest, like a project, can be just archived because they are old projects, right? So with this new information, we come out with our second option. So our second option will be like doing a partial migration. What that means is we will still keep the cloud instance, but only moving the limited number of projects from the server to the cloud. This way, we at least keep the app data on cloud. We won't lose the app data on the cloud. So they have all the log information.
Makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, you think that's a better approach, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Luckily, another background information is that prior to this migration, so we have helped this customer doing some work on that cloud side. So we have created some like generic project templates for this customer on the cloud. So they are happy to continue using those project templates for any feature project, even for the project we are going to move from the server to cloud. So that all of projects will look more like a standard and share the same set configuration, like workflow scheme, issue type screen scheme, right?
So that included also the fields?
Yes, the field configuration, yes.
Okay.
So like with this new agreement, so we started looking for tools to help migration from server project to cloud and per project basis. So Pawel, so in your story, right, you use the Atlassian project importing utility, right? Yeah, so we look at that, but again, unfortunately, this tool also only imported on the server side, right? From server project to another server project instance, right? So, but we want a tool that can move from server instance, some project to the cloud instance. So this tool, so we are not able to use that tool. So we searched up the marketplace. We found one app. It's called the Backbone Sync. It seems like it would do what we want, because this app, it actually can move data from server instance to the cloud instance. So it doesn't matter server cloud, so they can do can just synchronize the data. But in order to do that, right, because this app can only like move data, it doesn't migrate like the project configuration and do those. So that means we have to prepare the project on the destination cloud instance. So we have to create like an empty project in advance before we synchronize the data from using this backbone sync. So, yeah. So and then another good good point advantage using the second approach I want to mention is that it turns out we can minimize the downtime. Like we're talking about the downtime, it's very critical to customer. Using the sync, backbone sync, so on the cloud side, we can totally minimize the downtime, because users can still working on whatever project they are working on. And so we create a new project, empty project, and then we do the sync only to those new projects on the cloud instance.
Okay, so what were your next steps for the migration then?
Yeah, so just like your journey, we always need to do some mapping, right? So we need to do the field mapping, workflow status, sprint boards, and we, like I already mentioned, we have to create an empty project in cloud instance before we do the data sync. Yep, and of course we will also test with a trial instance. And so Pawel, you mentioned in your journey, you say you are able to extend your trial instance, right, like before the cloud originate at the very earlier. It's only 7 days. So it's nice. Atlassian extended later on to like 30 days. So you were able to do that, right? Yeah. So I just want to like let audience know, like being a solution partner, like a Dragon Agile, we actually be able to help customers to extend to few more months. So if you need more time to test out your trial instance, we are happy. We are here happy to help you out. So you can just email us and we'll go from there and extend.
That's great information to know. That's really good. I wish I knew that ahead of time.
Yeah, sure.
I'll know that for next time though.
Yeah, sure. Great.
Now, out of curiosity, how did you deal with the 5-user limitation of invite users into the Jira file?
That's a very good question. So, like say on the server side, we our customer already have lots of users on the server side, and manually adding on the cloud side, if those users are not already existing on the cloud, it's very labor intense, right?
It's a very long process. Yeah. 5 users at a time is really long. Yeah.
Right. So for that, we actually we have to import. So the procedure we do is we import all server users to cloud first, so that the backbone sync can map assignee, reporters, commenters to the right person, right? So the user has to be there first, and with this limitation, like you asked it, we had to ask Atlassian to help so that we can do a bulk user importing with the collect sellers, right? And then Atlassian actually replied very quickly, was very helpful. So we get this task done very quickly. So after that, then we will start, we'll be able to do using the app to do the project merging, importing.
So your strategy would have generated a bunch of notifications into those users. How did you resolve the notification problem?
Right, that's a very good question. Yes, we thought about that. We have to, right? So people don't want to being bombed by thousands of emails, right? So yeah, just like your migration procedure, like I said, I have to a few steps. We have to be we need to be thoughtful before we do a migration. So notification is one of those things that we have to think about. So so we actually create one special notification scheme. It's called the non-notification, so that we turn off all notifications. So when we create the empty project, we associate the first with this notification scheme, so that nobody only only limit maybe admin just to monitor the things are created, the issue are created, but everybody else. So we will just turn them off with using this non-notification scheme. So that's one other things I want to mention with my migration journey. It's after we complete moving the project from limited number of project from server to the cloud. So we still have a lot of remaining project on the server side, right? So we come out with a solution that we using a second cloud instance to archive the whole instance from server, just so that customer can reference back to some old project, archive the project easily. Remember that ideally they want to move out totally from server to cloud, because the AWS, they don't have resources to maintain, and it's being hacked multiple times. So this second cloud instance will be used just for archiving purpose. Yeah.
So can you share any additional issues that you've encountered in your migration?
Sure. So we do have a couple of hiccups, right? So while we're doing the migration, we realized that using the backbone sync, so all the users needs to be active in order to map comment, map the assignee and the reporters, right? So that means even those users on the server side, it's inactive users. We had to enable them first and then do the migration. After that, then we disable them again, right? So because we don't want customer to pay a huge bill just because of this migration things happen. So that's extra steps we have to take care of, and it's also if we had done that, it's also quite labor intense. Like again, we also ask Atlassian after we finish, we provide the Excel sheet with users and collect the status like active, inactive. So Atlassian was able to quickly deactivate those users. And also like one thing that we probably mix is again, you mentioned that too, like a duplicate the field names, right? That could also cause like troubles when you're not taking care of because we can easily pick the wrong like a field, even because they have the same name, right? And that will cause the migration fail. Yeah.
So it sounds like you wanted to clean up a little bit more thoroughly, right?
Yeah. So next time that would be like in feature. So we always like need to do like a more thorough like cleaning, but it will always be some like a little things you can miss. That's why documentation it's really important. Yeah. So yeah. So again, like after the migration, right? We need to optimize the system. So that including, like say, we already create a generic project template that counts one optimization, right? And again, we need to deactivate some inactive users. And like I said, previously we used a non-notification scheme. Now we have to enable the collected notification scheme, they associate with the project, so all the project will work properly. And again, so even we like clean up in the preparation step, you still need to like double check further clean up unused field starter schemes. That's a good practice, right? So that, and also again, like testing, the verification is a very important part. You want to know if all the migration is it's actually completely working. So as an admin, like you being an admin, also we being a solution partner, like helping customer out, we will do the verification after the migration, definitely. But Pawel mentioned the user knows much like best, because there are so many users, everyone like use the Jira in their own way. So you never know that how they use it and what issues will comes out, right?
It's definitely really important to have them check it, especially in a test environment.
To have user test it, right? Yeah.
So it sounds like our migration strategies have many similarities, although we use different ways of accomplishing pretty much the same goal, because we were both migrating projects from somewhere else, whether it was Jira Cloud or Jira Server, into another Jira Cloud instance.
Yeah. So so in your story, you also mentioned you were thinking about using the Jira Cloud Migration Assistant program, right?
Yes.
So why don't we take a look? And so you were not able to use it, but definitely this will be a tool that Atlassian is actively working on that, and hopefully it'll help anyone that migrations journey much smooth, right? Yeah. So like so we can take a look, shall we?
Sure, sounds good, Irene. Let's take a look and see what the options are.
Okay, so I grabbed this slide from Atlassian. This will be just some timeline, right? To we can see the roadmap to see what will be available, that when this migration assistant will be available. So it looks like right now there are some features in the early access program, right? Right now that's
right. That's exactly what I was looking at. Initially, it was the early access program, and from this, it looks like there's a lot of new things already that I'm seeing that we would have considered taking this avenue rather than the way that we did.
So it looks like it'll be available, like a beta version can be available early 2020, and then in the mid 2020, hopefully that time we have something that will help everyone. Atlassian has something that can help everyone do the minimize the lots of pain point of this migration journey, right?
Yeah, why don't we take a look?
Yeah, let's see what's the current current features are being covered. Yeah.
So it looks like there's users and groups that are being covered, project details. So all of that is outlined there, and looks like project role schemes and basic workflow stuff is being used and or migrated. Sorry. Screens, status categories, permissions, and issue security. So it looks like that there's a lot of stuff that's being migrated already. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, let's look at let's look at on the issue side, right? So on the issue side, it looks like all the basic fields also be covered, right? We can see all this SME report, even some custom fields and the label drop-down checkbox, right? Looks good, yeah.
It's looking pretty good. Looks like also the important agile things are being migrated as well, which is quite important for a lot of people, including Epic links. When I was looking at the early access programs, that was one of our,
that's why
that was our showstopper, which looks like they've updated that.
That's so great.
That is good news.
Yeah. You would have used it if that was available.
That was one of our showstoppers, one of our biggest ones for not using it.
All right, let's look at further. Yeah, so here's some features that isn't migrated. So for the project setup, it looks like some advanced workflow features like conditions, validators, post functions. But like say situation can change, right? Atlassian is gathering feedback and improving that. And hopefully it'll be available sometime later. Yeah.
But this would be perfect for somebody that has a Jira instance without an administrator. Usually they just build workflows without those things, right? So it's
okay. Then that it's not a problem,
not a big issue for us because.
Yeah, you use lots of advanced features.
We use a lot of advanced features. It was better to go with the Jira server. Okay. Let's have a look at what else is there.
So yeah, you can.
Looks like the boards, filters, names. That's also something that was not migrated using Jira server migration method, but I've recreated all that stuff after the fact. So it would be nice if this was migrated, especially filters and boards, because users love their filters. They love searching for stuff.
Okay, so let's take a look at this slide. So it looks like also Jira global entities may not be covered, right? Like global permissions, dashboard, cross-project boards filter, like you said. And of course, the app data, this will not be covered definitely. It's more like up to the app vendors to provide their own tools or methods, right, to migrate app data.
App data is probably one of the biggest pain points, and for every migration. And these plugins, some of the vendors don't even have instructions on how to do it, so you have to reach out to them directly, right? So whether it's Jira Server or Jira Cloud, it doesn't matter. But migrating app data would be a great benefit for everybody, I think.
So yeah, so like say to summarize, it looks like there is no magic tool with one click just to migrate everything, right? We wish you that it's the one tool.
It'd be nice. It'd be nice. Click and go.
Being a Jira admin, your life would be so much easier.
Oh, it would be so much easier. Yep. Sit there and wait to make sure nothing blows up, right?
So, but then, like say, no matter which approach we use, it looks like we always need to do lots of manual preparation, clean up, and of course verification after migration, right? This looks like it will always be part of everybody's migration journey. But like say we are here, like a DragonAgile would be like a solution partner like DragonAgile will be much happy if you need a hands-on and need a hand with your migration, feel free to contact us, right?
Yeah, cloud migration is definitely a journey, and it does take a lot of time and preparation and organization. And if you don't have resources to do that, DragonAgile would be the choice that
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. So I think now that's pretty much that our presentation, and it's time for taking some questions, right?
Okay, yes. So we have some questions. So the first one is, how do I contact Atlassian for support on cloud migration?
Oh,
Sure. Did you want to take it?
Okay. So yeah. So you can contact Atlassian for support by opening a migration support ticket at Atlassian support. I believe if you put in the keywords migration, it'll raise the very higher priority for Atlassian. Probably you'll get the reply pretty quick.
And
So
I gotta say, like, I've reached out to Atlassian migration support, and it was really fast compared to everything else. It's like unbelievably fast. Within a couple of hours, I already had my answers. So
that's great, because that really helps, because that comes like a downtime. People like a migration. Some people talking about takes few months, like a few months. It's really a long journey, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so another question we had was, how long can I keep an unlicensed server with archive projects reference?
You want to take that one?
sure.
Yeah.
So as far as I know, the Jira server license is perpetual. So you can basically keep it as long as you keep your server up and running. You just don't get any latest updates. You're just sitting on that version of whatever you have, and you can keep it as long as you want to. It's Jira server, so you're just paying the bill for keeping it running.
Okay, so another question we had was, what was your backup plan in case things were not migrated properly?
Sure, so I'll take that one. So for myself, because it was our target and source instance for one of the instances was in the Jira Cloud, we basically kept the cloud running until it was ready to be released. I have created a backup of our Jira Cloud instance using the Jira Cloud backup, not the Jira Server backup for Jira Cloud.
Yeah.
And basically, what happened was I kept that backup separate on separate secure space so that we can restore back to it. And we would have just basically told users, as this was happening over the weekend, on Monday morning, that hey, everything's back to the way you are and the way you were. We didn't perform the migration. We'll have another attempt.
So maybe last question. So
Yeah, sure.
before we wrap up,
So
Yeah.
our last question would be, what was the biggest pushback from your customers?
do you want to take that one too?
Sure.
Because yeah.
So, sure. So lack of app data
Since you are a customer,
migration,
yeah.
lack of that app data was probably the biggest thing, especially for things that users use on a daily basis. Biggest thing is Jira testing. So Zephyr data was really important to my customers. So by customers meaning my entire organization. And app data is a critical thing, and it is extremely painful right now to migrate it. And like you said, Irene, a lot of the vendors don't even provide instructions on how to do it. So like you said, it would be nice to have that magic button.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
we don't. So that was the biggest pushback is why can't I have this? I don't want to lose anything, and
Right.
you know that seems to be pretty common across all customers.
Okay, so that's all. I guess that's all question. But that's one thing about this presentation, right? So everyone, so we make this a presentation available on our website after this webinar. So we will put it on our website and send out the link, right, to audience. So if you want to check back and a reference to somebody else, feel free, and we'll make those information available.
Sure, and if you have any other questions, feel free to reach either one of us.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.